For nearly a year now, I've been scared. Waking up last October 7th to reports of Hamas's invasion of Israel, I desperately tried to make sense of the horror seen in the footage being put out by the terrorists themselves. Initially, I was scared for those who'd been dancing at a music festival, grieving those who tried to escape and were shot down in cold blood. I was scared for kibbutzes and towns close to the Israel-Gaza border, for the families hiding within their homes, those same homes deliberately set alight, families still inside. I was scared for the state of Israel and for my friends and family who live there. And perhaps, most of all, I was scared for the hostages, all 250 of them, but in particular, Naama Levy, with that terrible bloodstain on her tracksuit bottoms indicating sexual assault. I was terrified for the further horrors that they'd be subjected to. That night, though, when a clip emerged of people in the UK, British citizens on British soil, celebrating the worst mass slaughter of Jews since World War II, that was the first time I became scared for myself, for my family. Less than 24 hours after the invasion had been thwarted, as I joined fellow Jews gathered in central London in silent prayer for the dead, just up the road there were flares being set off, an anarchic mass celebration of the worst of humanity with no police in sight. That's when I became scared for the fate of the British Jewish community. In the ensuing months, those concerns only increased. My children were told to remove their school blazers for their own safety because they attend a Jewish school. Should I start tucking my Star of David inside my shirt after a man screamed "Free Palestine" at me on the tube? We were worried about going to synagogue as it's on the route of one of the marches that's plagued our cities and towns every weekend. Hundreds of thousands of people openly chanting for the genocide of Jews, carrying Nazi-era placards, yet none of them seemingly wanting peace enough to call for Hamas to return the hostages. Instead, there were flags proudly displayed of prescribed terrorist organizations. Worse than that, when a legion of men openly called for jihad, our own police force gaslit us with jihad has many, many meanings. Contrast that with someone holding up a poster stating a fact recognised by the laws of this land that Hamas are terrorists and they were the ones arrested. And that is why I'm now also scared for you, for all of us, for the UK, for the West. Even though it was Israel that was this week subjected to the largest ballistic missile attack in history from Iran, even though it's Israel that has last year sacrificed its youth trying to get the hostages back and now fights for its citizens to return home after being displaced by more than 8,000 rockets Hezbollah have fired. Make no mistake, it's the West that's also under threat. Worse than that, it's the West that are likely to remain so. For in the Middle East, there are glimmers of hope. Hamas's brigades are largely dismantled. Hezbollah's leadership destroyed. The Islamic regime in Iran has never looked more fragile, just in time, with their achieving of nuclear weapons only months away. And if the mullahs do fall, there is the first real chance in the region for peace. Other countries, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, even Saudi Arabia, have already come to see that recognising the right of Israel to exist with friendship and cooperation is what's most beneficial to all. The Iranian people may soon, too, be free to grasp that possibility. Lebanon can be free of Hezbollah. Gaza can be free of Hamas. It's only with Hamas gone that the Palestinian people have any chance of a peaceful and prosperous state of their own. And yes, I've too been scared for the sake of their innocence, cynically, consciously, strategically used by Hamas as shields. However, if the Middle East does come through this and enter a golden era, much of the West will still not be free. Many of our institutions will remain captured by ideologies that run counter to Western liberal democracy. The UN, with actual terrorists on its payroll. NGOs lying and parroting terrorist propaganda. Academia teaching and supporting its students who want to dismantle our society, to rewrite history and facts and even language. Genocide, apartheid, starvation, ethnic cleansing, terms now rendered meaningless. And then there's the media. Woe the media, our national broadcaster, who we have no choice but to finance out of our pockets. Even in the wake of two damning reports proving their bias, this week repeatedly platformed supporters of anti-West regimes allowed terrorist supporters to sprout unhinged lies and anti-Semitism with little to no pushback. And through all of these institutions and beyond, Islamists and the far left and the useful idiots and the brainwashed youths have been allowed to operate freely as they strive to destroy what our forebears built and fought for. They are the ones who I'm scared of. They are the ones we should all be scared of. And they are the ones that, moving forward, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with. And we're going to have to figure out a way to do so which doesn't undermine the liberal democracy that we are trying to protect. We have to maintain our freedoms and rights and free speech and dissent and blasphemy and equality laws. And that's the crux then, isn't it? Fear has been used for nefarious purposes in the past. McCarthyism had its origins in a legitimate fear. So we are going to have to somehow find a way down a twisty, complicated path to get through this without getting lost. I don't know the shape of that path. What I do know is it begins with a simple step, which is to state, I am scared. I'm joined tonight by Kezia Noble and Andrew Eborn. How are you both?
Good.
Sorry, that was pretty heavy. Heavy start.
I have to share your fear, and this is the problem, Josh, on a number of levels. First of all, I'll make it really clear, I'm pro-peace. I think, as you rightly say, it was abhorrent what happened on October the 7th. There are all sorts of questions as to how that arose. But also, there have been tragedies on both sides, and the first casualty in war is the truth. What's happening as a result, the horrible hate that spilled out onto our streets as a result of it, people are right to be scared. Nobody should be living in fear. When you have people trying to go to the Jewish schools and so on and so forth, you're seeing red paint splattered over that. That is abhorrent and it should be called out. It took the BBC far too long to call Hamas a proscribed terrorist organisation, which they are. And it's illegal in this country under the Terrorism Act not to basically say that you disagree. You mustn't support a terrorist organisation. What we have to do, though, is look at the tragedies on both sides. And we need to try and find a way forward, as you say, look for the future. My biggest concern as well is what the government's going to do as a result of it. Because fear, and it was Edward Bernays, the father of PR, turned around and say, basically, it's the biggest human emotion is fear. So you can sell anything through that sort of basis. If the government uses that to impose all sorts of laws on us and take away some of our fundamental rights, that's going to be a problem.
So, Kezia, I mean, do you agree with what I said? Are you scared for the future?
I agree with everything you said in that
thank you so much.
And I feel, and I have to say, I speak to a lot of non-Jewish British people. The silent majority are on your side. They don't want to see Jews being targeted this way. They don't want to see... I mean, let's face it, OK? It's not Jewish people or Israelis who are stabbing people on London Bridge or beheading a soldier. OK, people are not blind, OK? There's terrorism that's being imported into Europe, into this country. People are well aware of it. And... you know, what you said about that evening when people were celebrating the 7th of October, I saw that too. I was that footage, I was driving past Harrods, that's where I was driving, and I said, what are they all screaming and cheering about? And I saw this flag. And then I Googled what had happened. I said, I can't believe it. This says disgusting.
This is the thing was, of course, Palestinians...
It's a cult now.
Palestinian civilians have suffered.
Yes.
But this is before that.
Yeah, but that's the thing this was before that. Arguably, nothing to do with what comes since.
Police didn't stop. They were beeping their horns with such lust for dead Jews, lust.
Nobody should celebrate death on either side.
I haven't seen Jews doing this. And Jews in this country, I've not seen them out celebrating, going, yeah, we bombed Gaza today. Every Jew that I meet turns around and says, you know, it's unfortunate this is happening. We don't want it to happen. But they're not dancing in the streets about it. No. And I see this every weekend, because I live in central London most of the time, and I see this, you know, this Free Gaza mob, and it's turning into a cult now. It's becoming something else. You know, they're there every day, they're banners, and they're getting more... and like, no sensitivity. It's coming up to the 7th of October.
And you're right about sensitivity. And what happens on both sides, people get desensitised when you see the abhorrent pictures. And I say truth is always the first casualty in any war. You see the abhorrent pictures, you hear the statistics, and we get numb to those statistics.
A lot of that stuff is, by the way, is false that's coming out on Twitter.
And that's why I say question everything. You need to question everything.
From Syrian earthquakes. Yeah. And they're being fact-checked saying, look, we can actually show you this is the footage that happened in Syria in 2019. I was like, why are you saying it's happening in Gaza?
Child starving actually turns out.
Yes, and so much of it.
Be back in Syria
so much
again.
of it. It's not just a little bit. I'm not saying there are not children dying. There are, and it's terrible. And Israel needs to do everything it can to prevent children being killed. It has to do more. I believe it has to do more.
Absolutely.
But they are now pushing out fake footage from other catastrophes, which, by the way, got no protests. Got
Yeah,
zero.
well, that's, of course, yeah.
And you have to call it...
No Jews, no news.
We started on this sort of debate. I do a series called Fake or Fact on this very channel, and we had to look at those sort of stuff. We looked at some of that footage, and you say, yes, it's been reutilised, actually on both sides, and that's what we need to look at. So the reality is, I say that we need to be pro-peace. We need to find a way forward. The point that you made in your brilliant monologue at the beginning was exactly that. There's been tragedy on both sides. We need to find a way forward.
I'd argue that one side doesn't want peace. That's one thing I would say. And, of course, you could saw the people in the West, we want peace, but there's just no point saying that as some kind of... No, I'm not saying you're saying as a mealy-mouthed way, but the point is that's not going to resolve it. And my issue is more homegrown in that there is a generation of young people who have now been brainwashed, arguably, by this propaganda that they've been seeing on TikTok and what's not, who have bought into this idea that Israel is this demon state, that how that relates to Jews. It's a new form of anti-Semitism. That's how it's expressed nowadays. And I'm worried moving forward because as eventually, hopefully, this situation resolves itself in the Middle East, what does that leave? How does that leave our institutions, as I said, the BBC, the police, our schools, our academia? That stuff is now... It's entrenched within the system.
And you're absolutely right. If you kill family members, it works on that sort of basis.
Two-tier reporting, two-tier policing. That's what's happening. So they're not reporting, what's happening exactly like you said in northern Israel as much as they are reporting what's happening in southern Lebanon. And by the way, the Hezbollah, they were firing rockets before Israel even began to,
from
react.
October 8th. Exactly, 8,000 plus rockets.
But there are lots of questions to be answered. I think October the 7th was horrendous. What was known beforehand, because people showed the things about people rehearsing footage and so on and so forth. A lot of people, I understand, I've interviewed a lot of people from Israel as well, who sort of turned out 50% of them, more than 50%, don't support Benjamin Netanyahu. They want to find a way forward for peace. The other point to make is that obviously not all Palestinians are Hamas. So you can't, and looking at the tragedy on that sort of side, I also live in central London, very close to the BBC, and you see we had a fantastic community. We have the Israeli ambassador there, we have America there, we have obviously lots of synagogues and so on and so forth. And everybody lived in peace until this all spilt out on that sort of basis. And the more deaths you get on both sides, the more resentment that's going to build and division as a result.
I'd say the resentment is there. For me, though, the focus is how are we moving forward now? Because you have mosques, unfortunately, in this country who are preaching hate. This is happening on Friday nights across the country. This has been happening for the last year. These mosques are receiving... Before, of course it is.
Children, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Jewish schools, way before this, since the 1970s, have had to have extra security, and so have synagogues. I don't see that the Muslim schools and the mosques have to have this level of security. And the Jews are a minority. They are a minority in this country.
250,000.
Yeah, a tiny amount.
And it's absolutely horrendous. I say nobody should live in fear. And it's been a community...
Children going to school having to be scared. This is terrible. The government need to really crack down on this.
This is it, then. I mean, arguably, the Tories were getting better. They dropped the ball as they've dropped the ball many times over the last 14 years. Now you have the Labour government. They're trying to appease every side and messing up.
You need to call it out on both sides. There's been genocide, as you say, on what's happening with some of the Palestinians. You see some of that.
There's no genocide on Palestinians at all.
No.
Well, you talk about the number on that sort of people being driven out.
When are they going to start saying that they've made
Sorry, that's not a genocide.
When are they going to start saying they made a gas chamber in Gaza? I'm waiting for it. They put famine, everything.
I'm sorry, I just find deeply offensive and factually incorrect. But again, to try and grab back to the situation, forget the Middle East. People here watching this in the UK, this is our society that's being affected by this, and I believe it's our society that's being detrimentally affected by this, and steps need to be taken to address it. So that's all the point I'm trying to raise.
And you make it very well. And I think what we need to do is we turn down the narrative. We put more light and less heat on the situation. And words are offensive. And that's what
I think more heat. More heat. All right, time for a breather now. But coming up, we will assess the week's winners and losers between Kemi Badenoch, Dawn Butler and James Blunt, as well as Culture Corner and what happened next.